This is my assignment on the philosophy of teachers, the psychology of teachers, maladjustment, and good mental health. It's the final assignment. Maladjustment is the response to stressful situations for educators, and it comes from work stresses and not being able to control the environment around them and understand how students react to certain situations, and also the stresses that come from the person themselves not being able to adjust to their environment. The word maladjustment itself also looks at how the person is able to deal and balance with work and home. And the lack of the balance itself causes, in this case, the educator to not be okay and understand how they're able to find themselves uninspired and find themselves in a situation where they're unable to perform at their optimum. So as we go through this slideshow, we'll look at what causes maladjustment for educators in the education system and also how it affects students that they teach. I do believe that educators, probably out of all the professions, the most affected by maladjustment. This is because as much as they have less hours than other professionals compared to doctors and lawyers, and for argument's sake, policemen who are in more risking positions, they also do face stresses because as much as they have less hours, they also now have to balance dealing with students. And when dealing with students, students are more prone to stress an educator out, especially in a situation where the students are not performing, a situation where the teachers themselves are under deadlines, and the teachers themselves also become invested in how the student themselves perform and how it affects the performance of the whole grade. Educators, as much as they have less hours, like I said before, they also deal with unmanageable workload, endless responsibilities, and the environment itself of being an educator is very testing. Because, like I said, in a situation where your students have to perform and perform well, and some students are not interested in school and rather not participate in the whole process. At the same time, the educator has to deal with getting paid insufficient salaries. Lawyers and doctors, depending on how high they go up the hierarchy of their specific employment and their specific qualifications, are able to earn a lot of money for working less hours than teachers, while teachers have to deal with being the people that earn not a lot of money but still have to put so much work into being able to balance out how students themselves are able to perform. There are students that are naturally bright and those are easy to actually get on board for them to actually work. And on the other side of the spectrum, there are students that are not as motivated and might probably have to be in an environment where you have to cater more of your time to them. And that also causes a lot of stress for educators. And in all this, they also earn a low amount of money, and with a lack of a good salary, they then have to still balance the expectations of the board or whichever school environment that they're in, the expectations of performing, and still being able to get those students on par with the rest of the other students. That brings a lot of stress and also doesn't allow them also themselves to find that balance between work and home. Forbes, there's an article in Forbes that also highlights that the teachers themselves might also suffer from burnout and depression because of the point that I mentioned earlier, which is that besides getting a low amount of money, they also have to deal with the stresses and the pressure that comes from being able to produce a certain caliber of student. In some public schools, you might find that an educator has to deal with a large number of students that they have to oversee. For argument's sake, they have to deal with 41 or 31 kids, and in that number of kids is a high spectrum of kids that might not be able to perform to the certain standard, and a high failure rate only demotivates the teacher more, and also demotivates the student to actually want to carry on. So, for argument's sake, a teacher that's teaching grade 8 might be more demotivated because the students in grade 8 might not want to progress in school. I might want to drop out of school. So the burnout rate also, yeah, is 59% of teachers and 48% of school principals, compared to 44% of other working adults. These adults might be working in law, medicine, and other departments where it's more black and white, whereas in education, it's more centered around how the educator themselves is able to present and be able to allow the kids themselves to perform in that rate. Also, it comes back down to how 28% of all educators might experience depression syndromes, symptoms, while only 17% of non-teaching peers. And those situations also are brought by the stress that they have to go through and endure as educators. In some situations, in some schools, also might face the threat of violence, which also adds to the stress of the job. And in some cases, educators actually do experience physical violence, and a lesser amount, which is 34.9%, experience abusive language from students, which also causes more to the stress because the educator now feels like they're in environments where they're always attacked and consistently challenged by students. Describe the symptoms of a maladjusted teacher and the impact on the students. We might look at how the teacher themselves in the following slides affected from the students. We'll look at it from the perspective of the educator first, and then we'll look at it from the perspective of the student. The teachers who don't have the adequate training experience might now not be able to deal with unruly students, might not be able to deal with students that are rude, students that are not able to engage in the content, and that causes a lot of stress on the teacher themselves. The teacher now becomes uninspired, and without having that passion, that fire to push through or to be able to create more creative experiences or teaching experiences, the teacher might now become anxious and depressed, and the students can pick on that and will be less engaged in the education process themselves, meaning that the lessons become more boring and students become less interested, and that might even result in students being in the lesson. Also, when it comes to the symptoms of a maladjustment of a students might also be not have the educational and mental capacity to be able to perform, which makes them more stressed and makes them actually more uninterested in school. And with these factors, these students lack the motivation, the emotional stability, or even the mental capacity to be able to contribute in the learning experience. It might cause withdrawalness and timidness, shyness and self-consciousness, fear, and being anxious, and temper tantrums. The impact on an educator, the influence of impact on the teacher might have on the students. If an educator is if an educator is less interested, this might also affect the inconsistency of how an educator is able to present the lesson. An inconsistent educator then now brings lessons that are disjointed and might interrupt the flow, which might lead to students not being interested and not really worrying. I would say that the teacher needs to look back and find the purpose that they have. By recalling the purpose that they have, an educator might now be able to understand why they first became a teacher, and that might help them also to find the passion again. A point here I'd like to point out is that it's easy for a teacher to set goals for a certain pass rate of students, but when they have a system of understanding how they became an educator, it now becomes something that gives them the grit and the passion to pull through. Because once you have achieved your goal, it's easy for you to give up, and it's easy for you to then become disjointed and not really care. When you have a system, the system allows you now to be able to recreate that passion that you had and push through for the not even for the result, but for the process of recreating that purpose, that goal that you had. Here's my reference list, and thank you for listening to my presentation.